Welcome, everyone. We are very glad to be here, starting our November month with this amazing visitor. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for everyone on Zoom. We have been this semester trying to bring to STS other perspectives about what it is to look at science and technology. And we are very interested in interdisciplinary views and other ways of thinking, based not only on theory, but also on praxis that we not usually see in our canon in STS. So today we have this amazing opportunity to hear from Dr. Wade. So I introduce her very briefly for us to get a sense of why we should be so glad that she's here with us. So Ashleigh Greene Wade is an assistant professor of media studies in African American studies at the University of Virginia. Broadly speaking, her work traverses the fields of black girlhood studies, digital and visual media studies, black feminist theory, and digital humanities. Dr. Wade has a PhD in Women's and Gender Studies from Rutgers University and is an alumna of the Carter Hudson Institute for African American and African Studies Fellowship Program. Her work on Black cultural production appears in many outlets. I will cite some of them. Cultural Studies, The Black Scholar, Camera Obscura, Feminism, Culture and Media Studies, Visual Arts Research, Women, Gender and Families of Color, and National Political Science Review. Dr. Wade's debut monography, Black Girl Autopoetics, Agents and Possibility in Everyday Digital Practice, was published by Duke University Press this year. And it explores the role of Black girls' digital practices in documenting and preserving everyday Black life. In her introduction, we can read, quote, Black girls' digital practices constitute a means through which they invent and reinvent themselves, in turn, inventing and reinventing what it means to live, create, and preserve Black life. So I'd like to ask you to join me welcoming Dr. Wade. Thank you so much for coming. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for having me here for the Science, Technology, and Society seminar series. I'm very excited to talk with you about my book, Black Girl Autopoetics, Agency in Everyday Digital Practice, published by Duke University Press. Writing this book was truly a labor of love, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to share part of its contents with you today. I always like to begin discussions of the book with how I came to this research. My first job out of undergrad was as a high school English teacher at the school that I attended for 9th and 10th grades. And like a lot of first-year teachers, I was underprepared, especially because I had not originally intended to pursue a career in K-12 education. But I had zeal, and that's what matters, right? No. That school year was one of the most challenging periods of my life, and that job remains the hardest one I've ever had. When it was time to renew contracts in February, I resigned with no solid plan for what I would do next. But I knew that I would not be teaching high school ever again, until I did. After finishing my master's degree, I ended up getting another job teaching, but this job was different from the first one. It was an independent, all-girls school in a new city and a new state. My first classroom at this new school was in the basement of the main building, but it did not take long for the school's handful of Black girls to find me. My classroom became a place where Black girls would come hang out with me. Sometimes we talked about their frustrations, but other times we would talk about the latest music or watch funny YouTube videos, dance, and laugh at memes. All of these interactions helped cultivate a bond between the girls and me. But their fascination with Snapchat really drove me to develop an even deeper understanding of their lives. Because this app, which launched during the same year that I started working at the school, came to dominate our conversations. But naturally, they never actually let me see anything that they posted on Snapchat. So when I juxtapose this kind of open secrecy that they maintain to the stories they would share with me about the various issues they had at school, I began to wonder about the role of Snapchat and social media applications more broadly in offering ways for Black girls to have spaces where they could simply be without the pressure to placate others' anxieties or misunderstandings of who they are. To start answering the questions that sparked from this moment of curiosity, I began exploring Black girls' digital content. I studied Black girls' social media posts across applications, mainly visual applications, focusing mainly on Instagram, Snapchat, and YouTube. In committing to the journey of learning more about what Black girls do online, I knew I would have to look at digital spaces, but telling the story of Black girls' digital practices required going directly to the source. So I decided to combine my own interpretation of their content with ethnography and both in person and online. And so years of studying and collaborating with Black girls birthed Black Girl Autopoetics, Agency in Everyday Digital Practice. The book focuses on secondary school-age Black girls in the United States, combining both ethnography and media analysis to offer an account of Black girls' everyday digital practices, what their digital content reveals about their everyday experiences, and how their digital productions contribute to a broader record of Black life. Throughout the book, I weave together a series of stories of how Black girls create spaces and discourse through their digital media production. And I present these stories as a provocation to reevaluate processes that are integral to Black life, such as space making, archiving, communicating, and activist organizing through the lens of Black girlhood. In doing this, I argue Black girls' digital practices comprise a means through which they invent and reinvent themselves, in turn inventing and reinventing what it means to live, create, and preserve Black life. Before I get into some of the specific examples of how Black girls tell their stories through digital content, I want to spend a little bit of time defining the term Black Girl Autopoetics, as it is the theoretical crux of my book. My formulation of Black Girl Autopoetics draws from Sylvia Wynter's theorization of poesis and its related terms poetry, the product of poesis, and poetics, the practice of poesis. Wynter defines poesis as, quote, acts of making, end quote, and later explains poetry and poetics as an act of, quote, naming and conceptualizing that allows for the invention and reinvention of humanness, end quote. Using this approach, I define Black Girl Autopoetics as an inherently spatiotemporal praxis of creation. In breaking down autopoetics to its roots, the word translates to self-making. I deploy the concept of self-making in two ways. First, Black girls making themselves, that is, making their subjectivities. And second, Black girls staking claim to a creative process that is their own, or making for themselves. I define Black Girl Autopoetics as a praxis of creation because it encompasses how Black girls reinvent cultural products, spaces, and discourses in their subjective formation and expression. Black people have created and continue to create alternate new worlds within the worlds we were not meant to survive. Therefore, Black girl autopoetics functions as a world-making technology, a survival methodology rooted in Black girls' ways of knowing and making meaning. As a tool of creation and preservation, Black girl autopoetics empowers Black girls to construct narratives of their everyday experiences. Their digital content, especially on image-based platforms, often functions as evidence of their social interactions. And it's also a way for Black girls to show their lives. With this preface, today's talk will draw from the second chapter of my book, which shows how Black girls use social media to document their lives and what they value in the processes of recording and telling their stories. I will explain how Black girls' digital practices allow them to construct informal archives that not only provide glimpses into everyday Black girlhood, but are also essential to the fight against Black erasure as they preserve Black girls' images, stories, and memories. Vernacular image making, especially photography, has been a significant archival method for Black people as it has become an essential component of documentation and storytelling practices. For Black Americans, photographs reflect both the need to preserve the records of Black life against a history of erasure and engage in processes of self-making. Some of the main examples of Black vernacular photography, like studio portraits, school pictures, and amateur photos of events like birthday parties and graduations, hold significance beyond capturing the milestones of individual people and families. These vernacular images, oftentimes compiled into photo albums or adorning the walls of Black American households, function as personal or unofficial, informal archives of a family's history. For example, the images you see here are pictures from my family's informal archive. The house in the background provides the backdrop for a lot of my family's pictures because the purchase of this house in the 1950s is an important part of our family's history as a Black family in the South. The picture in the middle is actually from one of my analog photo albums, and it features me on my 17th birthday. And it was actually also my Black Planet profile picture, which is an old social media application that, you know, if you were born in the 2000s, you probably don't know about. Collecting and displaying vernacular images in photo albums and within our homes maintain their relevance in Black American cultures, but technological advancements have meant shifts in both everyday documentation and sharing practices. For instance, the invention and mass production of video cameras meant that people could capture an event in real time, in addition to having photographs as a trace of the event. The digital age, especially with the popularity of social media, has allowed, encouraged, and compelled wider sharing of these vernacular images. In the United States, smartphones are ubiquitous and relatively inexpensive as a whole, which means every smartphone owner has a camera at their disposal that can both capture still images and moving images. Not only do smartphone users have constant access to a camera, but image-driven social media applications make the process of uploading pictures and videos from the phone very easy. So the picture on the far right is actually a picture that was posted on Snapchat and uses a Snapchat filter. With such photos at the ready, creating and sharing vernacular imagery is not only easier than it was in the pre-digital era, but it's also become an integral part of socializing for many people in the United States. While we can look at individual Black girls' social media accounts as their own personal archives, certain motifs appear within Black girls' posts that might point to more collective archives of everyday Black girlhood. Here, I describe some motifs that emerged from the study of Black girls' everyday digital archives. These motifs across demographic factors like these motifs exist across demographic factors like age, social class, and geographic location. And so before I go to the next slide, I do want to make a quick note about the images that you'll see in the next part of the presentation. In doing research for this book, I collected thousands of images from Instagram accounts marked as public, as well as screenshots from YouTube accounts. However, I do not reproduce the original screenshots in my book or in presentations of the book. Instead, I use illustrations that capture the overall content of the original images. The illustrations were created by my good friend Al Valentine, who received their PhD from Rutgers. We were in the same cohort. Al does work in digital media, gaming, and race, and I knew they would take care to remake these images in ways that don't make Black girls seem like caricatures. I made the decision to use illustrations instead of the original screenshots for a few reasons. First, even though teenagers post images to social media accounts that are set to public, they might not want their photos and videos floating around outside of those social media spaces in public ways. Relatedly, using illustrations instead of the original photos and videos accounts for when girls change their accounts from public to private, which did happen a lot over the course of my research, and when they delete certain images. I don't want to circulate photos or video screenshots that girls have taken off the internet for whatever reason. And finally, I do this to protect my research participants' identities. Not all people will look at these images of Black girls and understand the arguments that I'm making about their creativity and their autonomy. And so I don't want to make them targets for people who might wish them harm. The illustrations have enough differences in facial and bodily likenesses to protect the original user's confidentiality. And it's not as easy to do a reverse image lookup with an illustration as it could be from a screenshot. I don't have time to talk about all of the motifs that I discuss in the book, so for the purposes of this talk, I'll focus on selfies, friendship images, and expressions of joy. The selfie comprises one of the most common types of content that I encountered when looking at Black girls' social media posts. Now, clearly, Black girls don't hold a monopoly on posting selfies. And this image format has simply become part of what we see and do on the internet. However, selfies have multiple purposes that oftentimes extend beyond seemingly superficial motives, especially when the subject of the selfie embodies one or more marginalized identity categories. So for instance, hashtag Blackout Day, which was popularized on the social media blogging site Tumblr, illustrates how Black girls and Black people in general have celebrated their Blackness through sharing selfies in digital spaces. The socio-discursive implications of Black girls participating in campaigns like Blackout Day lies in how producing and circulating these images provide opportunities for Black girls to see themselves in contrast to the dearth of imagery in mainstream corporate media producers like magazines, television, and film companies. As social media user Journey posted on Instagram, quote, "Blackout Day is important to me because it is a reminder of possibility. When I look at the media, I mostly see white. I never thought that Black girls could be beautiful until Lupita Nyong'o and Shonda Rhimes," end quote. Journey's reflection not only speaks to the psychological impact of media erasure on Black girls, but also how the inundation of affirmative Black imagery through campaigns like Blackout Day works to reverse this damage. While Journey's comment focuses on media representation specifically, other Black girls' assessments of Blackout Day show how lived experience compounds lack of media representation. Renee explained, quote, I live in a predominantly white community, and growing up, I was told I was not beautiful because of my skin color by some kids. I started believing them and thought of myself as ugly, and I started to hate myself, end quote. Similarly, Brooklyn shared, quote, some 2 years ago, I would have told you I am the ugliest, most vile creature walking the earth, end quote. Both Renee and Brooklyn's stories demonstrate internalized hatred of dark skin resulting from the combination of media erasure and everyday interaction with peers and other members of their communities. They also both cited Blackout Day as a self-edifying force. Outlining why she appreciated the campaign, Brooklyn explained, quote, through things like Blackout Day and seeing other people that look like me loving themselves, I've come to terms with how I look and started valuing the things I offer internally and externally, end quote. Renee offers a similar reflection, noting, quote, Blackout Day to me is very uplifting. It's telling Black girls all over, you're beautiful, you're flawless, let your melanin shine, end quote. These types of testimonies highlight the political potential of selfies for Black girls who struggle against being absented and or misrepresented. Even among Black girls who do not explicitly participate in organized challenges or campaigns like Blackout Day, their selfies can catalyze connections with other Black girls. Within the genre of Black girl selfies, natural hair images and references appeared frequently. More specifically, Black girls posted pictures and videos of their freshly washed hair, length checks, especially to show growth since the transition from relaxed hair to natural hair, and confidence-boosting natural hairstyles. Oftentimes, these natural hair images were accompanied by captions reflecting journeys to self-acceptance. For instance, Instagram user Janine used her post on the site to chronicle her transition to natural hair. In one post, she uses a split image of herself in 3 different poses with the caption, quote, at the end of the day, I ended up joining the Afro Clan, end quote. Responses to Janine's post included comments like, welcome to the clan, little mama, and yes, work it, Janine. Janine's posts and her friends' encouragement simultaneously exemplify Black girls' self-representation and illustrate how Black girls connect around their images. In this way, Black girls' natural hair selfies are more than vain statements of self-admiration or self-absorption. They oppose racist and colorist perspectives that position Black girls' unrelaxed hair outside of mainstream beauty standards. These types of selfies illustrate Black girl autopoetics on several levels. 1, Black girls use their selfies to create spaces and opportunities to bond and build community. 2, Black girls' selfies help to create a discourse of beauty derived from their own experiences and perspectives in the face of dominant beauty ideals that would make them ashamed of their bodily characteristics. Finally, Black girls deploy their selfies toward creating a new source of affirmative Black girl imagery that did not exist in such an expansive way for Black girls growing up at the beginning of the digital age, like me. In other words, Black girls of previous generations did not have these digital spaces to share images with each other. Yes, Black girls of certain eras had Black power imagery, but Black girls' selfies in digital spaces, especially on social media platforms, reflect an agential ability to create one's own images that simply did not exist in the same ways before social media. The everyday experiences of Black girls can illustrate their confrontations with institutionalized oppression. One of the coping tools available to Black girls comes from the friendships that they form. Despite the wide range of personalities among the girls with whom I interacted on social media, friendship showed up in each girl's digital content, at least occasionally, with some girls seeming to only post pictures or videos with friends. Whether these friendships developed at school, during extracurricular activities, or online, their centrality within Black girls' digital media production signals their importance for how Black girls both experience and navigate their social worlds. Many of the pictures featuring girls with their friends take on a variation of the selfie. In these types of pictures, 2 or more girls stand together, sometimes posing in front of a mirror, making silly faces, and or showing off new clothes. And they take a picture that reflects their relationship. The content showcasing friendships is not limited to still photography, and a large number of videos feature friends playing together, laughing, and showing their silly sides. These displays of playfulness, particularly in the context of friendships, allow Black girls to contradict early adultification and undermine stereotypes about Black girls being mean and aggressive. Monique Morris describes early adultification as, quote, Black girls are likened more to adults than to children and are treated as if they are willfully engaging in behavior typically expected of Black women. This age compression renders Black girlhood interchangeable with Black womanhood, end quote. The inability to see Black girls as children with innocence worthy of acknowledging and protecting makes Black girls more susceptible to violence and other forms of physical and psychological harm. Given the material consequences of early adultification, displays of Black girls' playfulness in this friendship content serves as a reminder of Black girls' childhood. Alongside the images themselves that speak to girls' closeness with their friends, their captions tell stories about the role that friendships play in their lives. Among the many Instagram photographs and videos of Black girls and their friends, love, longevity, and chosen kinship were consistent motifs. As one Birmingham, Alabama girl captioned in a collage, quote, this picture says so much about my relationship with my friends. All we do is laugh and goof around. I love my girls and wouldn't trade them for anything in the world, end quote. Her comment elucidates the importance of levity, loyalty, and love in Black girls' friendships. Through these images of friendships, Black girls engage in creative praxis in several ways. Beyond the images themselves, Black girls create counter-narratives about the nature of adolescent friendships among girls. One cliche about teenage girls positions them as catty, and I know because I worked at an all-girls school, and that is what people always said to me when I would tell them that. And another cliche is also about Black girls having bad attitudes and being mean. And so that makes that generalization of girls, teenage girls, even more reductive. By posting pictures of themselves with their friends, Black girls show that they do prioritize friendships, thus working against tendencies to pathologize teenage girls' relationships or the supposed inability to form relationships. So the beginning of chapter 2 includes a dialogue between girls that I did participant observation with in Richmond. And so I'm just going to read that dialogue before I talk about Archives of Joy. Destiny says, I was on Snapchat all weekend looking at my friend's snaps. I said, okay, is that mostly when you use Snapchat on the weekends? Destiny replies, nope, I use Snapchat every day. And Jennifer says, especially when you lit, you gotta show your life. In this conversation, Jennifer prefaces her call to show your life with an equally important clause, especially when you lit. As a slang word, lit has a few different connotations, but the way Jennifer uses this word reflects its association with excitement. Being lit is an affective condition in and of itself and constitutes an example of Black joy. Through their documentation of events such as birthday celebrations, prom, and graduation, Black girls create Black joy itself and the spaces for Black joy to proliferate. Based on the frequency of these types of images within Black girls' digital content, expressions of Black joy are essential to lived Black girlhood. And in another version of this talk, I have a whole section where I talk about Black girls' prom images, because that's like a big genre within the content that I found. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm talking about prom in the context of joy, and the images that you see here, a couple of them are from Black girls' proms, and you see like one Black girl by herself posing in her prom dress in a very playful way. And then you see another image with Black girls who is a group of friends at prom, and they actually didn't have the crowns on. The crowns, like, it's an emoji that was like superimposed onto the image as a way of being like playful. Through analysis of Black girls' everyday images, we come to see how they use social media as a means of self-curation, a process that simultaneously involves thoughtful selection of images to share on social media and creates a sense of authority for Black girls regarding their images. Black girls' self-curation allows them to engage in self-fashioning or self-definition. Like many other aspects of Black girls' digital practices, their self-curation connects to a history of Black people striving to define themselves within and against white supremacist sociocultural contexts that render Blackness inhuman. For example, Black historical figures like Sojourner Truth and W.E.B. Du Bois understood how photography, particularly the self-portrait, could be used to envision Black humanity. These examples demonstrate a tradition of how Black people have utilized visuality as a means of self-definition, and Black girls' self-curation in digital spaces fits within this history of Black people deploying their own image to represent their lives in ways that better reflect their experiences. Not only does Black girls' self-curation give them a sense of authority on a personal level, but it also speaks to a larger conversation about authenticity, because the possibility of performativity within Black girls' vernacular image making does not diminish the archival validity of their images. In other words, the digital self is not necessarily an unreal or inauthentic self, but instead it's a presentation of a particular reality toward a certain goal. As an inherently selective process, self-curation requires fragmentation, meaning no one's digital self-presentation offers a full characterization or representation of their subjectivity. However, those fragments are part of the subjective whole. And the realness of these fragments still holds true when self-curation is performative, because the performance becomes part of one's subjective composition and the digital self-archive, broadly defined. To clarify, I'm not suggesting that Black girls have unlimited authority over their images in digital spaces. Despite the supposed protections offered by privacy settings, none of us has complete control over who sees and shares the images that we post online. However, Black girls' self-curation gives them the ability to present parts of themselves that they choose to present. Exhibiting this agency within and against disempowering social contexts speaks to one of the many ways Black girls enact Black girl autopoetics through their digital content. And so I will conclude by reading the last section of the chapter. Memory, both individual and collective, is a central component of Black American life. Related to the preservation of memory are the complementary processes of storytelling and archiving. While both oral and literary traditions compose a critical part of the Black American storytelling tradition, visuality also plays a key role in narrativizing Black life and preserving collective Black memory. The invention of photography marked a significant time in the evolution of the documentation and archiving of Black life. And the mass production of cameras allowed Black Americans to document their experiences through photography. The camcorder enhanced memory building even more through the ability to record things in real time. Both of these technologies have facilitated preservation of Black memory in a way that simply was not possible before their invention. And the photographic and videographic capabilities of cell phones have enhanced the image-based preservation of Black life and Black stories even more. While Black girls' digital documentation practices correspond to a history of Black vernacular photography, they also show us the importance of building and maintaining archives of the moment. As Jennifer Morgan writes, quote, the archive suggests itself as a place that houses the past, but in fact, its meaning is primarily that of the future, end quote. Black girls' archival work, whether intentional or not, makes evident this relationship between the archive and time. Therefore, Black girls' creation of informal archives through their digital content attests to Black girl autopoetics as a spatiotemporal formation. Black girls' digital documentation practices allow for archival worlding, giving us both clues about the past and keys to the future. Social media platforms as corporate entities have significant limitations regarding their durability as archives of Black memory because profit drives their functionalities and availability. While we should not place the responsibility of collecting Black memory exclusively in the hands of corporate actors, social media applications, for now, offer a readily accessible tool for Black girls to document their lives in this moment. Black girls' vernacular image making and exhibition within these spaces offer important departure points for rethinking the relationship between Black memory, Black life, and Black survival. The way Black girls record their lives demonstrates how the preservation of memory is not a task solely for academics or trained professionals. Because Black girls' cultural work as informal digital archivists illustrates their desires to show their lives while simultaneously highlighting the precarity of where their archives exist currently, Black girls need all of us to be keepers of Black memory. Black girls show us that documenting the everyday will be a key part of preserving Black memory and therefore Black life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashleigh. What a wonderful presentation. We, as usual, we will open for questions. So if you have any questions or comments, you can raise your hands here. And if you are on Zoom, you can also hand your hands, and we are going to ask you to unmute yourself. Or if you prefer to write down your question, you can also do that. So any questions or comments?
I was wondering, like, how did the algorithm, like on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, show up in accounts of the girls that you interacted with, and like whether it was like a force that could like provide like affirmative content, or just like how did it show up for you?
When you mean how did it show up in my own research, or how did it show up for the girls in their social media use?
Well, in your own research was going to be my follow-up question, but in the first question, how did it show up in like the girls' accounts?
Yeah, so I didn't really discuss algorithms with them when I was doing this research. So I was doing this research between 2015 and like 2017, 2018. I did do a little bit of follow-up research in like 2019 and 2020 as I was writing the book, but the research was based on my dissertation research primarily. And so at that time, the algorithms that are on, like, Instagram algorithms were not as aggressive as they are now, in the same way. And so I didn't necessarily talk to girls about how the algorithm controlled the stuff that they saw, because one of the ways that they talked about the way they used Instagram was that they used it to connect with specific people and specific communities. And so I'm not sure how the algorithm impacted what they were just seeing like in their news feed, as opposed to who they were following on Instagram. So to answer your question, the first part of the question about the girls' use of algorithms, I actually don't know the answer to that question because we didn't talk about the algorithm. The second part of the question, though, is I was able to find a lot of the content that I found based on the algorithm. So like whenever I would look at like images of birthday parties, for example, I would see more images of birthday parties. And that actually, like, as a researcher, it works out kind of nicely because like you have like access to all of these different images. But there again, the Instagram algorithm has changed so much since then, because at that time, Instagram was not like implanting posts in your newsfeed that were from like random companies or people that you didn't even follow. Like now, I'll just get random things in my Instagram newsfeed because I think that it's trying to compete with TikTok's For You algorithm. And so, yeah, it still wasn't as aggressive in terms of like suggesting content. Now, YouTube is different because YouTube will just suggest videos based on what you're already looking at. But Instagram was not like that when I was first doing this research. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Ashleigh. I'm Lee. It's nice. It's so wonderful to have you here and meet you. I thought this talk was great, and I saw it as like I was thinking about Dana Boyd's "It's Complicated" a lot when you were talking, and I just like I really like how you're approaching the topic. And one of the things I was wondering is that Dana, in more recent essays, she's been writing about like how so much of popular discourse around teens and social media is all around like teen mental health, right? And of course, she also sees like it playing a more positive role in teen life and is really trying to kind of represent the breadth of it. And I just wondered if that came out in your research at all, or like whether those kinds of themes were coming up for you. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. In the introduction of the book, I actually talk about some of the more challenging aspects of social media when thinking about teenagers' use of these platforms. And I do that because in having like conversations and like presenting my work, a lot of people would bring up the very thing that you're bringing up in terms of like impacts on mental health, or like, you know, they would ask me things like, well, what about cyberbullying or harassment, or all of these kinds of fears that we have about the things that children are encountering on social media. And so I address those issues in the introduction as a way of acknowledging that, yes, these are important issues. These are challenges that we should absolutely be working to find solutions to. But these are not the only ways that teenagers are using social media. And in fact, if we just get rid of social media altogether, then it's going to get rid of this outlet that a lot of marginalized teens are using to find connection with each other outside of their in-person spaces.
Can I exercise my privilege and jump in with a quick follow-up to this? Thank you so much for this talk. This is fantastic. But I had been wondering whether any of the girls themselves were talking about any of these issues. Like, did they ever say, did they say things like, I know I'm on here too much, or, yeah, I should be doing XYZ instead of this? Like, did it show up ethnographically?
Um, I won't say that girls necessarily talked about whether they were on social media too much. Like, at least I don't remember having those types of conversations. But one of the kinds of conversations that we did have about an issue that I feel like a lot of us think about when we're thinking about social media is around surveillance. And so, like, they did talk about different ways that they try to navigate or even like circumvent surveillance from certain people. So those conversations came up primarily in the participant observation research that I did. And so, for example, I had asked them what would be the best way to like approach girls to like online to talk to them about their social media use. And they were like, oh, well, you can just, ask. Like, we're not going to, like, they're not going to be afraid of you or anything. But then they started saying, but, there are some adults on the internet who are creepy, and like, we have to like make sure that we're not engaging with those types of people. So they were aware of issues of like surveillance, also like people who might be predatory. So they did have an awareness of it. Even if they weren't like critiquing their own use, they were critiquing like some of the same things that we critique about the difficulties and challenges of social media.
Thank you for a great talk. I had a question a little bit similar to the algorithm. It's more of a on the technical side of things. Did the girls you were, speaking with, your interlocutors, were they talking about the technical affordances of the platforms they were using? And I was thinking of things like, you were doing this research, you said between 2014, 2019, and at that time, there were a lot of conversations, if I remember, about the ability to capture skin tone well in darker skins, and having the ability to see yourself reflected in the way that you would want to see yourself reflected. Were there those kinds of conversations about the technological capacities of these to represent themselves in these platforms?
I don't know that there were, I guess, in-depth discussions about the technological capacities of the platforms. I do think that girls definitely talked about the affordances of the platforms in a way that didn't necessarily deal with like those more technological things, but instead focused on how the platforms functioned in different ways. So for example, like they might use Twitter for one kind of purpose, and they might use Snapchat for something different. So that's the extent to how we kind of got into the different affordances of the apps, but it wasn't like an in-depth technical conversation. Yeah.
Ammonia Tolfari on Zoom says, thank you for this insightful presentation. And they ask, did you examine their intersecting identities as you reviewed their posts?
Yes. So the different aspects of Black girls' identities that I looked at were their age, clearly gender, and also geographic location. Because originally I was working with girls in Richmond, Virginia. And so I wanted to understand if there were things that were different about girls who were living in the South than girls who were living in the North or the Midwest. So I did look at like intersectional aspects of girls' identities. I did not find any significant differences though, in terms of like the things that they posted. And I even asked them, like the ones that I like talked to, communicated with online, I even asked them things like, do you think that living in whatever city you live in affects what you post on social media, or how does that play a role in what you post on social media? And most of them said that they didn't feel like it affected what they posted on social media. A few of them alluded to like if there were like political events or like rallies and things like that happening in their cities and how that affected what they posted. But for the most part, I didn't find huge differences across like geographic regions.
Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. And uh, my question is about purposefully hidden nature of showing someone's life, because you mentioned that, like, oh, we have to show our life. But this is my hypothesis, so please correct me if I'm wrong. So that my hypothesis is that, like, some part of if I am as a brown person, like, you have to show my life on social media, then there are certain things that I wouldn't want to show to the world, because I have some inherent, like, anxiety and some historical patterns of people saying things to me, including my mom. So I cannot say a lot of things. So I am trying to understand who the groups of girls that you are talking to, what kind of privileged background they come from, and what are the things that are being purposefully hidden, and what are the things that they are showing to the world about their life, and how they are maintaining that thing, maintaining the status quo in that online platform that I'm talking about the maintenance aspect of that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So your question really speaks to what I'm talking about when I'm talking about self-curation, and how Black girls are, or at least the girls that I write about, are very selective about what they post online. And so to the first part of your question about like the hidden aspects of like their lives, we don't know. Like, we don't know what those hidden aspects are, and we're not meant to know. And I'm okay with that, actually. And I think that, so part of my approach to studying Black girls and Black girlhood is that Black girls are, one, the foremost experts of their own lives, and two, that there are some things that we will never know about Black girls, and we have to be okay with that. And so I'm okay with not knowing what those hidden things are that they're not showing. In terms of maintenance of that like image that they're posting online, one of the things that I noticed about because I did this study over the course of like 4 to 5 years, so I got to see like the girls who were in high school, for example, I got to see them graduate as we were doing this research. And so one of the things I noticed about how they've maintained this kind of curation of themselves online is that as they got older, especially as they got closer to like graduating and like entering college, their presentation of themselves changed, right? Because there were things that they wanted to highlight about their lives that made them seem more adult, right? So they didn't post as many selfies or like videos of like them playing around with their friends or like joking around. They posted more things like if they were involved in extracurricular activities, like what kinds of like sporting events they might have been participating in. And especially the athletes would post like clips of themselves like playing sports because they were trying to get recruited by different universities. And so there's definitely a maintenance that happens in terms of like what they're showing. And I think it evolves based on how they're evolving and transitioning from childhood to adulthood.
We have another question on Zoom from Catalina Hernandez Cabal. Thanks so much for this amazing talk and for taking seriously Black girl cultural production in this way. I am curious about whether there was any discussion about how or whether the girls in your study were considering audiences as a variable that influences their curation and image making. If the accounts are restricted or public, would they affect if girls' curation and image making enables them to be safe and authentic? Would the openness of the audiences change their approach to self-curation? So are they practicing curation in conversation with certain audiences other than friend groups in specific?
So yes, they are practicing curation with like different audiences in mind. And the way that they addressed this with me was that they shared how they have different platforms for different things. So for example, like if their Instagram account is public, right? They know that other people besides their friends might see the content that they're posting on Instagram. And so they're only going to post things that are suitable for like a wide number of people to see on this like publicly available Instagram account. However, they would also have a personal Instagram or a Finsta, and those were the accounts where they would post just stuff for their friends or their like close inner circle. Another way that they talked about doing this was like Snapchat. So it was very hard to research images on Snapchat because if you take a screenshot of the image, it will notify the person. And so I never took screenshots of Snapchat because I didn't want to be seen as like this creepy person who's like trying to collect images from the girls. But Snapchat was also a way that they, in a lot of ways, got around this kind of like unknown public audience, because the way that they would use Snapchat was specifically to communicate with friends and people that are in their closest circle. So they absolutely are aware of audience, and they are like curating their content based on the potential of certain audiences to view their content. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but they're not even using Snapchat anymore. So
Yeah, I also have a question. Many questions, but one is about your theoretical intervention in the field. You make the case of talking about Black girls' autopoetics, and I keep thinking about how this conceptual framework is bringing to our field of media studies and other fields another way of thinking of what you are calling vernacular production. So if you could talk more about the way that you conceptualize autopoetics, thinking about the Black feminism, the Caribbean Black feminism that you bring to your work, it would be great.
Yeah, so Black girl autopoetics, like the theoretical conceptualization, really came from the way that I was kind of putting together my methodology for doing this research. So what I mean by that is, like, when I was analyzing the images, I wanted to look at not just the annotation or the denotation and connotation of the images, but also looking at like affective aspects of the images, and also like thinking about what Kara Keeling describes as like the out of frame. So like, what is informing the image that we can't see, that's like outside of the image. And so when I was putting all of those things together, there were things that I noticed that, especially when we're thinking about like affective responses, there were things that I noticed in Black girls' images that I couldn't quite articulate through the existing frameworks that we have for like analyzing imagery and analyzing like cultural production, even beyond like just image creation. So I think that what Black girl autopoetics offers as like a theoretical intervention is a more expansive way for thinking about cultural production, especially in relation to marginalized groups' cultural production. And so that's what I see as the intervention into like media studies and science and technology studies, even though honestly, like when I was writing this, I wasn't necessarily thinking of Black girl autopoetics as an intervention into media studies. I was thinking of it more as an intervention into girlhood studies, also as an intervention into Black studies, because I think that Black feminism and Black girlhood studies has to be more central in Black studies, because I mean, we can't really have a full understanding of Black life and Black experience if we're completely ignoring like Black feminist theory and Black girlhood studies. So yeah, when I was first, like I said, writing about Black girl autopoetics, I actually wasn't even thinking of it as an intervention into media studies, although now I do definitely like see it as an intervention into media studies. I also think the other kind of key intervention into media studies is how we understand the digital. And so I talk about the digital as like a material space in a way that's different from the way that we typically think about the digital as this immaterial, abstract thing. And so I think that is also an intervention that Black girl autopoetics makes into media studies specifically.
Hello. Yes. Thank you for your talk. I appreciate that you highlight the affordances of social media as well as also talking about the issues that we have. I've been arguing that social media does bring things for marginalized communities, so I appreciate that. And so I'm sort of thinking about how if you were to do this research again, looking at Black girls' social media profiles, like, and maybe you started now and finished in like 2028, perhaps. Do you think that you would notice anything different? And I sort of asked because like multiple people have sort of identified that the algorithmic technology on social media has changed like pretty significantly and continues to change as well as like, I mean, I'm sure we're all so excited for the election next week. Am I right? And all of whatever that brings with it. And I'm also thinking about like how social media is used to create an archive for sort of violence against Black people as well. So, do you think that you would see anything different? And if you do think that, what do you think would change, or what do you think? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I do think that I would see different things. One, because I would be asking different questions. So I feel like the questions that really animated this research were more about how Black girls were using social media to both intervene in and construct conversations about social issues that were important to them. And so what I ended up finding was that Black girls were talking about social issues online, but that mostly what they were doing was like building community and like expressing themselves in terms of like identity formation, and just subjective expression. What I think would be different about doing this study now, one, is that content creation has changed so much of how people use social media. Like the impulse to create content has really changed how people use social media, especially like since the start of the pandemic, right? Because I think that was not, it wasn't, yes, like we were all at home and we were bored. And so we were like, you know, on social media, especially TikTok more. But I also think that that was a moment where people were realizing like, oh, I can like create content for TikTok and earn money from that. And so like, there's a there's a different, I think, economic landscape now that I think would have to inform the research that did not necessarily shape the research questions back then. Also, we're talking about like algorithms, AI. All of these things are technologies that are not brand new, but have definitely changed a lot since I was doing this research. And so those would be things that I think would definitely change the nature of the research and the nature of the findings if I were to do this same study from now until like 2028. And my next book is going to focus a lot on this kind of impulse to create content and what that means for children online, like more broadly.
Yeah, no, now that you talked about children, we had a past visitor who also came to talk about the relationship between children and technologies, but she was more concerned with the HCI kind of approach. But when reading you, what I felt but that is very compelling is that to talk about Black women is not to talk about Black girl.
Correct.
And that's what I would like to ask you to talk a little bit about, like, why do we need also these approaches in terms of, we are talking here about Black girls, not Black women necessarily.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So another kind of impetus for the creation of Black Girl Autopoetics is because I felt like even though Black feminist theory informs my study of Black girls, that Black feminist theory doesn't always map onto Black girls' experiences, especially when we're talking about Black feminist theory that is born from Black women's experiences. Because, and I talk about this in the book when I'm distinguishing Black girl autopoetics from Black feminism, theorizing like about childhood as an adult is different from theorizing about childhood while you're still in the stage of childhood. And so I think it's important for us to recognize girlhood as a distinct stage of life that is different from womanhood. And so that's why I wanted to look at Black girls specifically, not like aside from thinking about like Black women's interpretations of Black girls or Black women's kind of theorization of Black girlhood, but I wanted to look at Black girls' lives from their own perspectives. And I also think that's important because for me, I think that it's important to distinguish Black girlhood, especially from Black womanhood, because Black girls are already adultified in our society. And so when we don't make those distinctions between Black girlhood and Black womanhood, I think it further adultifies Black girls and assumes that they are already like Black women or like Black women in training or like, you know, like becoming Black women, and not all girls grow up to be women, right? So like, I mean, I think it's important to make that distinction in terms of thinking about the stage of life that they're in.
Yeah, and I think my question is a good follow-up, or I'm glad you asked your question first. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about access, kind of in two ways. You gave us this really great story about kind of how your research question got started and how you had this connection and rapport with the girls that you worked with. And I can imagine how your project came from there, and you asked us to, but if you could just like talk a little bit more about that, about sort of rapport and access, and how researchers, especially grad students, can think about that kind of those kinds of relationships, and how research can come out of rapport and relationships. But then also just whether there's anything that people need to think about or know when they're researching teenagers and girls about like the institutional review board and like protected groups. And if you could just talk about that a little bit,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
So I think that building a rapport with Black girls was definitely one of the biggest contributors to me being able to write this book and to tell the stories that I tell. And even with the girls that I talked to online, so I didn't know them like prior to reaching out to them on social media. They were very like excited to talk to me about themselves and like to share their stories with me. And I think that the important thing about doing research with people in general, not just with children, is that you have to really care about them as humans and not look at them as like data points, because they can feel when you're like just trying to get data for your project, right? And so I think the thing that allowed me to have such great communication and rapport with the girls who contributed to this study is that I reached out to them and I said, hey, I want to know more about like how Black girls are using social media, and would you mind talking to me about how you use social media? And a lot of them would say, wait, you want to know about me? Like, you want to understand my life? Like, you're not coming here to tell me like what I should and shouldn't post, but you actually want to know like me and my motivations for doing what I do. And so I think that was really important. In terms of the IRB, this might be different now. Like if I propose this same study now, it might be a little different given how much more we know about the impact of social media on youth mental health. But my experience is that the IRB was very lax in terms of like my proposal. And that's not what I was expecting. And it's not what my advisors were expecting either, because one of the things that they told me was like, oh, you know, you're probably going to have to do a lot of back and forth with the IRB to be able to do this study. But I was looking at publicly available social media accounts, and the IRB's approach was like, well, if it's out there, then, you know, free reign, right? And so that actually bothered me a lot. And so I talk about that in the book. I have an interlude that's about digital ethics and how I had to put my own ethical guidelines in place in addition to what the IRB had established, because they were basically like, I could collect whatever images I wanted to collect. And like once I take a screenshot of it, it's technically like my image, right? And so like I can reproduce it. I can, like, there were no stipulations about what I could do with the data because it was publicly available. The only stipulation was if I came across images that showed like girls doing something illegal, I had to report it. So like if, let's say like I came across an image of a girl like smoking marijuana or something in a state where it's not legal, I would have to report that. And I had to make them aware of that in the consent form, that if I saw videos of them doing things that were illegal, had to report it. And then the other stipulation was that if there were conversations where girls disclosed that they had been sexually assaulted or abused in any way, I also had to report that. But they knew up front that I had an obligation to report that kind of stuff. But other than that, there was no like additional guidance around how to collect and share the girls' images, which I found appalling.
So my question relates to platform decay, the concept by Cory Doctorow, where platforms, social media platforms, or just online platforms in general, will gain a lot of users by being very user-friendly, easy to use, pro-consumer, and then once they have all of the consumers in their ecosystem, the platforms get worse and worse and worse until they kind of become unusable. Modern Facebook's a great example of that, Twitter under Elon Musk. And I'm curious if that is something you noticed in your conversations? Were people being like, "Oh, the platform was so much better a year ago. I hate this new update. I can't see what my friends are up to now. I just get ads, or I just get whatever the algorithm wants." And was that something that was noticed?
Yeah, so I think that we definitely had conversations about how platforms changed over time. But I think for the girls that I talked to, the biggest driving factor for them to like leave platforms was not necessarily the usability of the platform, but it was like what they saw as like the invasion of like older generations like now taking over the platform. So that's why they weren't really on Facebook, right? That's why a lot of them have left Snapchat. So like they just keep like whatever we like latch onto, then they leave and like migrate to something else. So it's not as much about the usability, but it's about like who's there.
Hi, I'm Antonio. Thank you for your presentation. You just gave me ideas about my research. I always do that. I just keep thinking and thinking and be silent and just listening. Um, I have questions regarding interviewing people in the US that are not legally in the US versus interviewing people that are US citizens. What are the legal implications of doing that for a purpose of the research? Thank you.
I think that's a great question. That did not come up when I was like dealing with the IRB. So that was not information that they said I had to disclose. And none of the girls, like some of the girls told me that they were from immigrant families, but they didn't necessarily disclose their citizenship status or their resident status. So that actually didn't come up. And I think it would be something that like individual IRBs would address in terms of like whether or not you can even engage with participants who are undocumented, or if you like can engage with them, but you have to disclose that information. And in that case, from an ethical standpoint, I would just choose not to include like if I had to like basically tell that my participants were undocumented, I probably would not include their information in the study because I wouldn't want to like jeopardize their livelihood in any way.
Another question on Zoom. Catalina asks, I wonder whether girls were interested in being recognized as cultural producers in your study or preferred to remain anonymous. What was their interest of existing as subjects and voices in your project?
That's a good question. So there is a chapter where I don't anonymize the girls in the book. And it's the last chapter where I'm talking about activism. And the reason why I don't anonymize those girls is because I don't want their activist work to be anonymous. Like I want them to get credit for the work that they're doing. And so they were one of them is Marley Dias, so she's pretty much like a celebrity at this point anyway, so I didn't think it was necessary to anonymize her story. I've also like talked to her mother, and so like it's, you know, it's that example is a little bit different. In terms of the girls in the other chapters that I do anonymize, I think that they understood that their accounts would be anonymized and they were fine with that. And I think they preferred that just because some of the things that we talked about were things that they might not necessarily have wanted to share like under their own name. So for example, I talked to a girl who was who identifies as queer, and she hadn't come out to her parents. So like she didn't want her information, like her name, to be like in this book. And so I think that for the most part, like the anonymity of the girls in the other chapters of the book that are not about activism was really to preserve their integrity and their interiority so that they don't feel like, you know, they're telling me their secrets and then I'm going out and like telling the world.
Yeah, I have a quick question for the archive maintenance, or how to do how to archiving throughout time and crossing different platforms, especially when you. I'm really glad that you mentioned that the older generation begin their more and more usage on the old platform like Twitter or Facebook, and also so recently I'm just helping my dad and mom moving all our family photo books to Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kind of like yeah. So I kind of like have two questions. The first one is how they keep this kind of archiving crossing or amounts crossing different platforms, maybe from Facebook or from Snapchat or from some new platforms. Another one is that I wonder if your informants ever share about their reflections or this kind of moment when they go back and look on all these old photos, like you are reading your old family photo books. What's their reflection on their previous archive or this kind of archiving process? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question first. So, because it made me think of a specific conversation that I was having with some girls, like some high school girls, and we were just talking about like social media in general, and they were like, "Oh, remember when we used to like reshare these like fight videos or whatever in middle school?" They're like, "Oh, that was so immature. Like, why?" So they definitely like talked about how their social media use changed like as they got older, and the things that they thought to document or they thought to share with each other were different as they got older, and reflected like how they were becoming like more mature. And then as far as like archiving across different platforms, they use different platforms for entirely different purposes. So for example, like I would say the most archival platform for them was Instagram. And they would use Instagram in a very specific way. So like to post like certain types of pictures. So like whether it's like birthday parties or like prom pictures or images from like sports, like playing sports and stuff like that. That's how they like archived Instagram. And that's part of the reason why Instagram plays such a prominent role in my research, because that was the platform where I found the most content at that time. Now, Instagram has changed a lot. And as I was like trying to do like follow-up research, I noticed that a lot of the girls had stopped posting on Instagram, and instead they were using the stories feature. And so like those things are not really archived, right? Like they kind of go away after a certain amount of time. So, and then with Facebook, if they were even using Facebook, they really just used that as a way to like kind of show like their elders that they were doing what they were supposed to be doing, right? So it's like, oh, I'm gonna show that I, you know, made an A on in my English class, or I'm gonna, you know, post the graduation pic, you know. So yeah, they had different methods of archiving across different platforms. And there were certain platforms that they used specifically because it was not an archive, like Snapchat, for example. Like they did it, the things that they shared there, those were things they didn't want like to be archived, and things they didn't want to like necessarily go back and look at in future years. So
Yeah, I think we are close to end.
okay.
I don't know if there are any other questions in the room or no Zoom. I don't know, Ashley, if you have noticed, we usually try to bring technology to the fore, and then we start thinking from that perspective. And I think you bring another way around of thinking about Black girls, and then tell us what technology means from that perspective. And I think this, I don't know, helps us also to make sense of what we have in hands. And another thing I think is a great contribution that you bring is to bring users to think about technology as well, because I think we usually try to reflect on the impacts that technology has on humans, because for a lot of time this has been neglected, but then sometimes we forget that the users also domesticate this technology. So with that, I will give you, I don't know, more minutes if you want to close. And I just thank you a lot for the perspective you brought for us.
Thank you very much. I actually don't have additional like closing thoughts, but I do want to give a shout out to my cover artist. So the cover art was actually done by Kaya McBride, who is now a high schooler, but she was only in 7th grade when she designed this amazing cover art. And I just want to make sure that I give her a shout out, because it's very important to me for Black girls to be part of this work. And so that was like her contribution to the project. And so, yeah, thank you very much.